after a Turkish court reinstates Twitter, the government moves to block YouTube. Obama heads to Saudi Arabia, a strong ally and also one of the biggest critiques of the United States' foreign policy over the last few years. Amnesty reports the global rise in execution from beheadings to electrocution, and countries topping the list.
The News Today with Lucy Aharish.
Good evening. Turkey has moved to block access to YouTube. This comes after what appeared to be a leaked audio recordings of Turkish officials discussing possible military operations in Syria. Turkey's foreign ministry responded by saying the leak of a recording was a wretched attack, while the telecoms authority said it had taken administrative measures against the site. And joining me right now, Professor Dror Zeevi. He's an expert on Turkish affairs at Ben-Gurion University in Israel. Good evening.
Hello.
So now we started with Twitter, now YouTube. How come?
Well, first of all, it's really amazing. It's almost impossible to follow what goes on in Turkey. Things are changing by the hour, maybe by the minute now. As you know, there's a local elections on Sunday, and anticipating those elections, every day you have new wiretaps on YouTube and other media. This last wiretap wasn't just the discussion of defense foreign ministers and the prime minister about Syria. It was actually a cynical attempt by the prime minister to incite war with Syria in order to help him in the elections, which is, of course, a terrible scandal. We sometimes hear about these things, but we never actually hear the people doing it.
So can we say that it is connected to the election? Because what is he trying to do exactly?
He is desperately trying to win the elections. Although these are local elections, they're very important for him. It's a kind of a test of his leadership. If he fails in those elections, he will probably be asked to leave. So he's trying to do anything in his power to remain prime minister. And one of the things he's trying to do is probably foster all kinds of other crises which will move interest away from his own corruption and the corruption of people close to him.
Before I will ask you what is his current status in Turkey, there is a certain affair also with Israel. Israeli officials deny Turkish media reports today, claiming Israel and Turkey agreed to reopen embassies in each other's capitals and are even considering a visit by Turkish Prime Minister Tayyip Erdogan. I-24 News diplomatic correspondent Tal Shalev has the story.
After almost 4 years of strained ties, it seems almost inconceivable. But if Turkey and Israel reconcile soon, maybe, just maybe, we will witness a historic visit by Turkish Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdogan to Israel. But not so fast. Over the past week, more and more Turkish media reports are signaling that Ankara and Jerusalem are getting closer to signing a reconciliation deal after their once close relations fell apart following the Israeli commando raid on the Mavi Marmara flotilla ship in May 2010, in which 9 pro-Palestinian Turkish activists were killed. The Marmara incident sparked a major crisis between the longtime regional allies. Ankara expelled the Israeli ambassador, demanded a formal apology and compensation, and an end to the blockade on the Gaza Strip. Last year, at the behest of U.S. President Barack Obama, Israel extended a formal apology, but the expected normalization never arrived. In recent months, diplomats from the two countries have been working on an agreement to restore ties, but it hasn't been reached yet due to divisions on the amount of compensation to the families and the legal status of the deal. Now it seems that the gaps are closing, or at least that's what Ankara would like to believe. But Israeli officials insist they don't know of any progress and that reports are incorrect. Meanwhile, Israel did decide to allow Turkey to send trucks into the Gaza Strip with building material to complete construction of a Palestinian hospital. The timing of the Turkish media attention and its linkage to the local elections to take place on Sunday could be questioned, But between the Turkish media reports and the Israeli goodwill gesture, Jerusalem and Ankara could be getting closer to ending this saga.
So, Professor Zevi, is it or isn't it true?
Well, there might be some truth to it. There are negotiations, and perhaps some of the deal is being hammered out by the officials. But it seems to me also part of Erdogan's election strategy. I'm not sure what it serves, but first of all, the papers
He
that
needs Israel to win.
I don't think he
his
needs
elections?
Israel, but I think he suspects, first of all, that Israel has a hand in his rival's attempt to take him down. And also, he believes perhaps that the U.S. is influenced by Israel and he would need the U.S. somehow. I'm not sure how it plays. It was published in a relatively minor newspaper and picked up by the Israeli newspapers, but I don't think it's a major attempt by the Turkish government to really reach agreement, and I don't think there is much substance to it at this
What
point.
is his current situation in Turkey right now, political situation?
Well, he's, of course, the prime minister, and he's heading the largest political party, but these news of corruption, very deep down corruption of his family, himself, and other ministers
Are hurting him, of course.
Of course, yes.
Professor Zevi, who thought that Tayyip Erdogan will believe in the Jewish conspiracy? Thank you very much for this.
You're welcome.
United States President Barack Obama will arrive tomorrow in Saudi Arabia to meet with the Saudi king, a visit meant to focus on closing policy gaps on Syria, the Iranian nuclear threat, and Israeli-Palestinian peace process. I-24 News correspondent Eli Ochenberg with the tense relationship recap.
President Barack Obama's upcoming meeting with Saudi Arabia's King Abdullah comes at a tense time with relations between the U.S. and the Saudi kingdom have become strained. For years, the two countries have been partners in a wide range of areas, from trade and investment to promoting stability and regional security. Now, Obama, on his first trip to the world's top oil producers since 2009, is expected to try and clear the air after the rare public spat and to find common ground on Syria's civil war and the stagnant Israeli-Palestinian peace process. For Riyadh's ruling princess, Washington has always been the ultimate backer of security, using its military clout to contain regional threats, but lately, the road has not been easy. First, the Saudis expressed rage over the passive action of Obama in all regarding the Syria war. The Saudis wanted Washington to get involved in the ongoing crisis there, siding with Sunni rebels, and according to some, even offered to fund the U.S. attack in Syria. The American decision to stay out of the war caused major disappointment in the kingdom. But it was not the only disappointment. Sunni-dominated Saudi Arabia and Shia Iran have long been rivals, with the two competing for leadership of the region. Saudi Arabia, wary of Iran's regional ambitions, is also skeptical of the interim nuclear deal reached by world powers and the Islamic Republic in November, viewing it as a risky venture that could support Tehran. All of this has left Saudi Arabia and other U.S. allies feeling somewhat discontent, and it's important for the United States to keep their relationship warm. Riyadh remains significant to Washington for its cooperation in fighting al-Qaeda and its influence with other Arab states. During his visit, Obama is aiming to soften the tensions, a mission which will not be easy.
The use of capital punishment in the world is rising. An Amnesty International report that came out today shows a spike of 15% in executions in 2013. Although overall statistics for the past decade show a decrease in the total number of executions, this recent data is alarming. More in the next report from I-24 News correspondent Roni Ben-Bassat.
In today's world, the death penalty is still a burning reality. Amnesty International is reporting a global rise in the number of executions carried out last year. Close to 100 more people were put to death in 2013 compared to the previous year. The top 5 executioners: China, Iran, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, and the United States. The spike in the number is attributed both to the countries which resumed the death penalty and also to a sharp rise in executions in Iraq, and in Iran following the election of President Hassan Rouhani.
We haven't seen any positive developments since the new president came into office in relation to the death penalty. In fact, we've seen, as this report highlights, an increase in executions in Iran this year.
The report was published in the same week Egypt sentenced 529 members of the Muslim Brotherhood to death, possibly adding to the future death count.
Obviously, we hope that those death sentences are not confirmed. They came after a totally unfair trial, and that number of death sentences handed down in one group is obviously completely horrendous.
But the most troubling numbers are those that go undocumented. According to the organization, the overall figure in the report does not include executions carried out in China, a number believed to be in the thousands, more than all other countries combined.
Because the death penalty is a state secret in China, we are unable to confirm reliable figures. The minimum that we confirm is so much less than what we believe to be the true picture. We do not think that it's correct to publish them. And instead, what we've done since 2009 is challenge the authorities in China to be more open and transparent about the use of the death penalty.
The report does not only criticize the use of capital punishment, but also the secrecy that surrounds it, encouraging more countries to keep their data transparent and meet international standards for fair trial. According to research presented in the report, to this day there is no credible evidence that capital punishment acts as a deterrent for crime, raising the question, why is it still being used so widely, even in 2014?
Yes, and joining me right now from London is Audrey Gauguin, Director of Global Issues with Amnesty. Good evening. Thank you very much for joining us.
Good evening.
So the statistics are only for execution that were documented. Is there any estimation for the magnitude of unrecorded execution?
Well, the report doesn't cover, as you said in your previous report, it doesn't cover the thousands of executions that we believe take place in China. It also doesn't cover this year, as in 2012, it didn't cover Syria. We were unable to confirm information in relation to Syria. And we have seen an increasingly worrying trend towards secrecy in the use of the death penalty and in executions, which makes it very difficult. I mean, our figures are the lowest that can be safely confirmed. So you can expect that what we publish is confirmed, but the true picture is likely to be far higher. The true number is likely to be far higher. I would say, for example, we spoke about Iran. We've documented 369 acknowledged executions in Iran, but credible reports lead us to believe that there may be more than 700, with the rest having been carried out in secret.
So the United States is ranked 5th in the report and is very different from, let's say, the other 4, Iran, China, Iraq, Saudi Arabia. Is there a chance that it will change in the future?
Well, in the United States, you're looking at the death penalty is implemented state by state. So you see different pictures depending on which states you're looking at in the United States. And we've seen some in 2013. We did document some good news in the United States, with the state of Maryland becoming the 18th state to abolish the death penalty. But we also have some concerns about states in the US that retain the death penalty. But they are, as with countries in the world, those that use the death penalty are becoming increasingly isolated. In the US, for example, the state of Texas alone was responsible for 41% of all executions in the United States.
So in the future, to, let's say, prevent more that the numbers will get even bigger, what can a person do? What can the countries do? What can you do?
Well, there are a number of different things that people can do, that NGOs can do. One of them is the challenging of the arguments that are used to support the death penalty. And one of the ones that comes up a lot is that it's necessary to combat violent crime. And this simply isn't the case. And there are studies to show that the death penalty is not a particular deterrent to violent crime, and not more of a deterrent than a prison sentence. But we are seeing increasingly movements of activists in different countries that retain the death penalty, challenging those narratives, challenging their governments when they say that. And for example, we've seen the creation of a network in the Caribbean region, the Greater Caribbean for Life network, that is challenging these issues in that region.
Audrey Gauguin from London, thank you very much for this conversation. And we're moving on. Former Ukrainian Prime Minister Yulia Tymoshenko announced today she will run for president in elections set for May 25th. Just last month, Tymoshenko was released from jail after the overthrow of her arch political rival, President Viktor Yanukovych. Now she says she is running to protect the unity of Ukraine. This will be Tymoshenko's second attempt to become Ukraine's president. In another development, the International Monetary Fund is close to an agreement with Ukraine to provide financial assistance worth between $14 to $18 billion over the next 2 years. A Lebanese army officer was shot dead in Tripoli during fighting between rival sects on Thursday. Lebanon's national news agency said masked men on a motorcycle had opened fire on the officer, killing him instantly. Fighting between Tripoli's Sunni Muslim and members of the Alawite sect has killed at least 28 people over the last 2 weeks. Now let's take a look inside Israel. And joining me now for a look inside Israel's Act 24 News correspondent Eli Ochenberg. Good evening.
Good evening, Lucy.
So, and tonight we will deal. An IDF major denounced a soldier who hung a gay flag at their base as a disgrace. But before we will try to figure out if the IDF is gay friendly, let's see a report.
Don't ask, don't hang? A gay scandal in the IDF. A drill sergeant in a military base told soldiers that the pride flag they hung in their room is, quote, a disgrace to the state of Israel. The Nachal Brigade combat soldiers hung a pride flag in their room with a Star of David drawn on it. The sergeant, who was inspecting the base's room, found the flag. IDF spokesman said in response that
the said incident has been taken out of context, as the order was given to soldiers with the purpose of maintaining the appearance of the base and not out of malice.
In contrast to this incident, the IDF is considered one of the most gay-friendly armies in the world. The Hague Center for Strategic Studies recently launched a LGBT military index, and in its first report ranked the IDF in the 9th place worldwide in terms of acceptance of sexual minorities, beating the US, France, and Spain. And indeed, the IDF is making many efforts. The army allowed a male soldier to wear a women's uniform, ruling that the male soldier was, quote, in every way a woman, excluding the body. And yet, despite these norms, acceptance is still far from unanimous. The Israeli Gay Youth Organization polled hundreds of gay soldiers in 2011 and found in an online survey that 40% of all gay soldiers said they have been verbally harassed for their sexual orientation, 20% have been sexually harassed, and 4% said they have been physically assaulted. So the road to full recognition is still long.
So, Ellie, are they gay-friendly or aren't they?
Well, in this subject, Lucy, Israel is not so different than from the rest of the world. Wherever you're in a patriarch masculine group, you feel the discrimination, and that includes women, the LGBT community, and just other hierarchy positions. The IDF, such as all the armies across the universe, is still male-dominated. Yet, since 1993, all homosexuals can openly serve in all the IDF units and branches, and nonetheless, the military recognizes same-sex couples, including widows and widowers of same sex, and allows all soldiers to participate in gay pride parades. Furthermore, Lucy, the IDF considers certain transition treatments, such as hormone replacement and sex reassignment surgeries, as medically necessary for some, and this is something we cannot take for granted. So we've asked today what Israelis think about the whole gays in the army issue.
Let's see.
Every citizen should do his share for the army. I was in the army during the Yom Kippur War. My son served in the army, so everyone should do it.
I don't have a problem with it. There are people like you and me. Let them serve.
I'm against it.
God creates people the way He wants, and everyone should do whatever they want. No one should decide for someone else.
I
think that every single citizen here who wants to protect his home should do it. Everyone has his time to serve in the army. It doesn't matter if you are Arab or Orthodox. As long as you live in Israel, you have to protect your country, period.
You know, Eli, there is a phrase in Hebrew that says "gever, gever" when you look at manly men, when you look at a man with uniforms. A manly man should not be only straight.
Absolutely. We will get over this.
They will get over it. Hedy Ochelberg, thank you very much for this. We're going out for a small break, 2 minutes break, and then we will be back for the daily question. A day after a Turkish court reinstates Twitter, the government moves to block YouTube. Obama heads to Saudi Arabia, a strong ally and also one of the biggest critics of the United States foreign policy over the last few years. Amnesty reports the global rise in execution from beheadings to electrocution, and the countries topping the list. With the Israeli-Palestinian peace process in deadlock, loud voices inside the Israeli government are calling to halt the scheduled fourth round of prisoners' release until the Palestinian Authority commits to extend timetable for talks. It's an extremely heated issue, of course, on both sides. Tonight on the Daily Question, we asked, should Israel release Palestinian prisoners for the peace process? And joining me is Nori Zanger, editor in I-24 News. Thank you very much for coming. And Professor Ariel Dad will, of course, join us in a while. We asked, our viewers answered.
They answered. Let's go straight to the poll. Let's take a global look at the global picture. Just 17% said that, yes, Israel should release Palestinian prisoners. A whopping 81% said no.
81% said no. Although it's part of the timetable agreement.
It is. Well, it's this
framework.
Now it's a sort of absurd chicken or the egg situation where Israel won't release prisoners unless the talks are extended. Palestinians won't extend the talks unless Israel releases prisoners.
Well, I have to say that the poll is very surprising. I thought that it's going to be 50-50.
I thought it would be more towards that center, even the opposite. So let's start with the minority, those who said yes, and see what their arguments were. Let's start with Komina, who said, she wrote from Togo, saying, yes, the release of Palestinian prisoners is a step towards peace because it's one of the nodes of this conflict. You know, treat it kind of surgically, one step at a time. All of those elements of the conflict, you have to kind of go through with them. And this is kind of what we heard from both Anan in Nablus and Mike Rogers in Haifa, who say basically Israel has to stay with its agreements. In Nablus, he says, Israel committed to release the prisoners. Promises should be kept. If not, diplomacy is worth nothing.
And, there's a good point there. Israel did commit to release prisoners.
It did. It released them 3 waves already. The 4th one was expected on Saturday. All signs point to 100% that that's not going to happen already.
And it's a ritual, we have to say, that it's always, all the time, before prisoners release, there is these people who disagree, and then they go to court, and then the court gives 48 hours, and then, of course, it doesn't.
Very heated issue that we've covered here each time. Both sides have very, very strong opinions on it. Let's continue and go to James in Johannesburg, who also goes for the yes. He says it must be done. Releasing prisoners will be another huge boost to the Palestinian Authority, the only entity even interested in talking with Israel at this point. So there's a good point on that end, that Hamas is not a partner for peace at this point.
Basically,
strengthen Abbas, strengthen the Palestinian Authority by giving kind of this move of good faith.
Yes. Now let's see what Professor Ariel Dad, which we had here a few times, chairman of Professors for a Safe Israel, is joining us right now via Skype. Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening. So, Professor, we are, of course, we know your ideas, and we know what you think about it. This is not the first time that you say what you think about it. So basically you agree with the 81% who said here that Israel should not release prisoners.
As far as I understood, the agreement was that the release are divided to doses, to parts, just in order to follow the advancement in the peace process. And if there's no advancement, there's no need to release more prisoners. It's the first time that I know that murderers are prized for talks. And if the talks are meaningless and comes to no result, there's no reason to release more murderers into the free market of terror.
But Professor Eldad, what do you do with the promise that Israel gave to release these prisoners?
I am not quite sure what this promise was, whether it was conditioned with the advancement in the talks or just a flat promise. If it is a flat promise and the agreement doesn't really matter whether Abu Mazen is going to break all the negotiation the morning after the release of the prisoners, that's a farce. That's not a peace agreement, but just a bargain to release murderers. And this, of course, I'll be against.
You know what the critics will say? The critics will say probably that, well, at least Israel, if they are continuing building in the settlements, at least release the prisoners.
We are building in our homeland because this is the right of the Jewish people that was recognized in 1917 in the Balfour Declaration, in the San Remo Agreement in 1920. And this is the only valid international, recognized by the international law, any documents that are still valid. The 47 decision of the UN was not accepted by the Arabs because this is not a valid document.
Yes, Professor Aryeh Eldad.
We have the right to build settlements.
Professor Aryeh Eldad, thank you very much for this.
Also, to answer just quickly, part of what he said was what was the agreement itself? Well, part of it was for releasing prisoners for Palestinians to promise not to press for statehood at the UN. For Israel's part, there is a good argument that if they release prisoners now and they don't extend the talks, then what guarantee do you have that they won't go ahead and do that?
Yeah, but let's not forget that Israel committed to the United States to release the prisoners. So
there are a lot of commitments on both sides.
Definitely.
Let's go to some of the people who kind of support in different ways what Professor Eldad just say. Christian says, let's not forget this is not the only time Israel releases prisoners. They release thousands for just one soldier, referring to Gilad Shalit most likely, and it only increases the calls for kidnapping in Israel. How is this different? So this is a good point too. People make the point that Professor Eldad made also, that a lot of these may return to terror. You can't have any guarantee of the safety when they come back and when they're released. Yes. Let's just do real quick to Rob, who says Israel should never have agreed to this deal in the first place. What it should have done is free settlement building. And this is, of course, another good point that he just mentioned. Whether or not, no matter what the details of the settlement building are, it's probably not good for Israel to have this as a point of criticism during peace talks anyway. So.
Yes. Norita Zanger, thank you very much for this. I won't say that you will be back here tomorrow because I won't be back here tomorrow. We're going out for our weekend break. You'll be back on Sunday with another question. Thank you very much for this. We're going out for a small break, 2 minutes break, and then we will be back for our second part with sports, economy, and culture. Don't go anywhere. A day after a Turkish court reinstates Twitter, the government moves to block YouTube. Obama heads to Saudi Arabia, a strong ally and also one of the biggest critics of United States foreign policy over the last few years. Amnesty reports the global rise in executions from beheadings to electrocution, and the country's topping the list. Welcome back again. The streets in Cairo reacted today with great support to the announcement from military strongman Abdel Fattah al-Sisi that he would indeed run for president. Even former President Hosni Mubarak said to Al Arabiya Network, the people want Sisi and the people's will shall prevail. I-24 News reporter Uwe Shapira on the hopes and fears in Egypt regarding the possible next president.
Egypt's new sweetheart or another dictator? Former Defense Minister General Abdel Fattah al-Sisi is the man of the hour in the Middle Eastern country, a day after he announced his resignation and his intention to run for president.
Honestly speaking, Field Marshal Abdel Fattah al-Sisi is an honorable man, and most of the Egyptian people love him. He also rescued the Egyptian people from the terrorist brotherhood, who were taking the Egyptian people down the road to hell.
We want Sisi, and inshallah he will win. It needs a military man. He has a good charisma and everyone loves him. I will vote for him 10 times.
All signs show now that El-Sisi will win overwhelmingly next July, as no other candidate is strong enough to run against him. Despite the clashes that erupted after Sisi's announcement, the people of Cairo sounded perfectly united in their support for El-Sisi. Some, however, are still concerned that Egypt under El-Sisi's regime will return to the dark times of former President Hosni Mubarak, to an isolated, divided and neglected country where large sections of society cannot express their views.
We tried a military man for a period of over 60 years. Experience says it won't do to have him be president.
3 years after Mubarak's fall and only few months since former President Mohamed Morsi was ousted, Egypt is still divided and torn. The Egyptian government has done its best to fight the Muslim Brotherhood and sentenced to death 529 Brotherhood supporters last week. Now, all the hopes and fears are pointing towards General El-Sisi, the only man in sight right now who may bring unity back to Egypt, but also the one who can break this country apart.
And now returning to United States President Obama's visit to Saudi Arabia, in a connected and ongoing story, the Saudi government refused an entry visa to the Jerusalem Post's Washington bureau chief, who planned to cover the visit along with other White House reporters. The White House Correspondents Association went public with a complaint calling the decision outrageous. Deputy National Security Advisor Ben Rhodes said the United States government was very disappointed by the decision. And the Jerusalem Post bureau chief who was refused, Michael Wilner, joins me right now. Good evening.
Good to be here.
Thank you very much for this phone call with us. So could you just tell me, when did you find out the visa was denied?
Sure. Well, I heard the news on Monday, which was a deadline that the Saudis were actually given, as it was the very last day I would have been able to travel in time to make the president's trip. The Saudis were made keenly aware of that. So they held my passport for 2 weeks until the very last minute.
I have to say that the reaction from the White House and your colleagues was very supportive. How did you find it?
Yeah, I would have to agree. The White House press corps obviously stands for press freedom every day when its members go to work and do their jobs properly. But of course, I was particularly proud to be a part of it this week, because I think it's just been a very bright silver lining in all of this, watching the reaction. And I certainly was humbled by the efforts made by the White House as well. I think their efforts came from a genuine place of concern of what was happening. And I also think it's just wonderful that when the politically correct thing to do is also the right thing to do, as I expect any administration, regardless of party affiliation, to stand with for equal treatment and press freedom and the like.
Michael, from your point of view, what do you think the real reason was? The fact that you are Jewish, or the fact that you're working for the Jerusalem Post?
Sure. We have very little doubt that it was an issue. It was one of the two issues you just outlined, and that's because there simply were no procedural impediments to my application. I'm a credentialed member of the White House press corps. I was invited explicitly on the trip. So we have very little doubt, and I know folks in the administration as well.
Yes, Michael Wilner, thank you very much for this. And we're moving back to Israel. Former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert is facing another criminal investigation following new evidence presented by his own time closest aide. I-24 News diplomatic correspondent Tal Shalev reports the latest Israeli political scandal.
Sometimes reality is even better than fiction. The heroes of the latest Israeli House of Cards story are former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert and his one-time top aide and devoted confidant Shula Zaken. After years of faithful and close relations, the alliance has broken down and is threatening to bring Olmert down with it. Just a few days before the final verdict in the Holy Land trial, one of the worst fraud schemes in Israel's history, Zaken flipped over and turned sides. Olmert and Zaken, together with 14 other defendants, are accused of taking bribes to push through a massive Jerusalem housing project over a decade ago, when Olmert was mayor of Jerusalem. For months, Zaken refused to testify against her former boss. But after Olmert steadily escalated his tone and did not defend her in court, she decided to speak up. This week, Zaken provided new evidence to the police, which could be used to file obstruction of justice charges against Olmert. After several days of negotiations, she reached a plea bargain with the state. She will testify against her former boss in exchange for serving only 11 months in prison. The smoking gun evidence prompted the prosecution to request postponing the Holy Land verdict in order to put Zaken back on the stand against Olmert. Olmert's team dismissed the new evidence as lies, produced as part of a, quote, witch hunt against him. But the former premier was planning on acquittal and using it for a political comeback. All that has changed. Even if the new evidence has no real impact on the outcome of the trial, it will certainly have one on the Israeli public.
Now let's spend some money. We're not really going to spend some money, but somebody else is spending money. Joining me now is financial analyst Lionel Friedfeld. Good evening.
Good evening, Lucy.
Who spent a lot of money today?
Australian company Woodside. They're buying the largest oil and gas company in Australia, and they decided to enter the Israeli market by buying 25% of the Leviathan field, gas field, for almost $3 billion.
From Yitzhak Tshuva.
From a consortium exactly composed of Delek Group from Yitzhak Tshuva, they're holding 45% of the right, but also from Noble Energy, the first American company that invested into the gas field into Israel, and another oil and gas company called Oil Exploration that holds 15% of the right.
What is the meaning of this deal to Israel?
You see, the meaning of the deal, why the deal is done today, is because the regulator in Israel was blocking the deal for 1 year. Because of the consortium, the company we mentioned before, are holding, there is no competition to the market. Tshuva and the other company are obliged to sell other 2 gas fields. That's why the Australians are coming into this deal, and they're coming to help actually the consortium to build a new platform to do storage and distribution of gas.
So if we want to look who's gaining from this? Is Israel gaining from this deal?
It's Israel both way, because 80% of the gas reserves are going to be dedicated to the Israeli market that will help corporates to produce goods at a lower price. It's what we've seen in the US with the shale gas dividing by 4 the cost of production. So Israeli companies are going to really produce less. But 20% of the gas is going to be dedicated now for export in this gas field, and export will be mainly, there is a choice to make either to Egypt or through Turkey.
So if I want to be a little bit selfish, what does it mean to me as the small citizen of Israel?
A lot of money is going to come to Israel for sure in the next 5 or 10 years, because we're speaking about this contract. 20% of the Leviathan field means 20 till 30 $1 billion contract over 15 years. It's going, maybe they will have a pipeline to Turkey, maybe they will sell to LNG players in Egypt, but at the end of the day, the state is going to have a lot of VAT and income, and at the end of the day, the state of Israel is going to create a sovereign fund with all this income. They're going to invest abroad, and the dividends will be invested into Israel in education and in many fields.
And when politics is connected to economy, who knows, maybe it will better the relationship between Turkey and Israel.
Exactly. So also a strategic choice.
Yes, definitely. Lionel, thank you very much for coming.
Much.
The United States President Barack Obama held his first meeting with Pope Francis in the Vatican Square. The 2 leaders discussed world hunger and human trafficking as protesters outside the Vatican tried to raise another important issue, the expulsion of illegal immigrants from the United States. I-24 News reporter Uli Shapira has more.
All roads lead to Rome, said the old idiom. U.S. President Barack Obama is fully aware of this saying, as he managed to squeeze in, somewhere in between participation in the G7 summit and his visit to Saudi Arabia, a meeting with one of the most influential figures in the world, Pope Francis. The 2 world leaders had a fruitful conversation regarding topics close to both of their hearts, such as fighting world hunger and human trafficking. Other issues like the Catholic resistance to Obamacare, abortions, safe sex, and same-sex marriages were put aside. As Obama and Pope Francis held a seemingly relaxed meeting, groups of Mexican and Tunisian migrants gathered outside the Vatican and raised another important issue.
We are here to ask the Pope to help the 12 million migrants in the United States without documents and to ask the American president to stop expulsion and hold an amnesty on the migrant issue as we wait for reforms to be implemented in the United States.
The American president might have more in common with Pope Francis than he had with his predecessor in the Vatican. Francis is considered to be moderate and liberal, and his past statements showed openness and tolerance towards the gay community and other religions. It is too soon to dismiss the historical disputes between Washington and the Vatican, but today, President Obama and Pope Francis could mark a first step towards a new start with a handshake.
It's a historic day in the Philippines as the government and the largest Muslim rebel group there signed a peace agreement ending decades of bloodshed. I-24 News reporter Mirav Savir reports.
45 years of violence came to an end on Thursday when the Philippines government and the Moro Islamic Liberation Front, known as the MILF, signed a peace treaty in Manila. The historic agreement, called the Comprehensive Agreement on the Bangsamoro, is the product of 17 years of negotiations between the two sides. Malaysia has helped broker the peace talks since 2001, and Prime Minister Najib Razak was in attendance for the signing, which was welcomed by all sides.
So many people have suffered for so long. So many of our stakeholders have worked so hard to arrive at this point. I will not let peace be snatched from my people again. Not now. Not now, when we have already undertaken the most difficult and most significant steps to achieve it.
From the distant past to the present, the comprehensive agreement on the Bangsamoro is the crowning glory of our struggle.
In signing this agreement, the two sides have looked not to the problems of the past, but to the promise of the future.
As part of the deal ending the violence that killed 120,000 people and displaced 2 million, the rebels agreed to stop the rebellion in exchange for greater autonomy in the Muslim-dominated Mindanao region in the south. An area currently split into 5 provinces will be replaced by a more powerful, better-funded region to be called Bangsamoro. But while both sides celebrate this historic political achievement, other insurgent groups promise to keep fighting until they win full independence.
And joining me now is Nadia Ellis, researcher at the Tel Aviv University and speech analyst. Good evening.
Good evening.
How are you? Good to have you.
Thank
back
you. Good
again
to
in
be
the
here.
studio. So today we are going to speak about the speech of President Abbas in the Arab League in Kuwait. We know what he said, but what he really wanted to say is...
Well, what he really wanted to say basically is that Israel is responsible for the failure of peace talks in case peace talks fail, of course. We still don't know, but apparently these are the intentions, but the responsibility falls entirely on Israel. And how does he do this? He basically says that Israel is willfully boycotting the negotiations. And he says, I quote, Israel is working to perpetuate the occupation instead of finding a peaceful solution. And it is carrying out demolitions of Palestinians' homes, arrests, and it's strangling the Palestinian economy in order to impose a final settlement on the Palestinian issue that conforms with Israeli demands. So what is interesting here is that Abbas is returning the usual narrative that he uses when he pleads for peace. Usually when he goes to the UN, for instance, pleading for a solution to the Palestinian issue, he says, well, Israel is occupying and therefore we need a solution and we need peace talks. But now peace talks have been going on for a year already. And he needs to justify the failure of the peace talks. So the same arguments that he was using in order to say that we need talks now are useful to say that talks will fail.
Which is very interesting. And what about the recognition of the Jewish state?
Well, of course, they said very clearly, both Abbas and the Arab League, that they're not willing to recognize Israel as the Jewish state, but they also passed the same message in a very subtle way when they talk about the Judaization of Jerusalem. They say, and I quote again, that Israel is scrapping the Arab, Islamic, and Christian identity of Jerusalem. Now, where is the Jewish identity of Jerusalem in all of that? We're talking of the capital of the Jewish
three
state.
religions.
Absolutely,
It's not only two
absolutely.
religions.
But apparently, the Jewish religion is not considered in their way of seeing Jerusalem, and the identity that they consider is the identity of Jerusalem. So, if Jerusalem, which is the capital, of course, is Christian and Islamic and Arab, but not Jewish, well, obviously they can't recognize Israel as a Jewish state, can they?
No, most definitely not. It's amazing. It's like when you analyze these speeches, it's like the subtext that we are hearing. It's the words you can say however, but it depends even the way that you say it. And he has a special way to say the things.
But what is interesting in discourse analysis and speech analysis in particular is that we, as researchers, we cannot know whether what is being said on purpose or not. This could be the way that Abbas or any other person speaking actually sees the world. It's not necessarily a manipulation that is done on purpose. Sometimes, through the words, we can understand the way people see the world, even if they're not really capable of saying that with their own words.
Yeah, and it depends if a nice half a smile maybe sometimes is helping or not. Nadia Ellis, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Israeli defense company Elbit Systems has a new system, the Hope More Safety in Commercial Flights, which these days is of particular relevance. The report from I-24 News reporter Daniel Ziri.
A civilian aircraft equipped like a military Air Force jet. The Israeli company Elbit Systems, which develops defense systems used worldwide, is unveiling technology aimed at protecting commercial flights from terrorist attacks launched from the ground.
With helicopters or aircraft. The threat of shoulder-fired missiles, which are called man-pads, is one which has been growing exponentially in the past 5 to 10 years as a result of the proliferation of these missiles all over the world. Specifically, anybody can actually go onto the internet and buy a man-pad missile, which is kind of scary. The recent conflicts around the world, such as Libya, where 20,000 of these disappeared overnight and are now all over the world, basically has raised the threat level to an unprecedented level.
Confronted with this threat, the company Elope, a branch of Elbit Systems, has created a series of devices like this one. They can be attached to a large range of aircraft and avoid any missiles coming their way.
A system can be installed on the aircraft, detect the missile launch, and divert the missile away from the aircraft. The systems that we have developed as part of the Sky Shield program for large airliners and small airliners and medium airliners is a system which uses laser technology, advanced laser technology, to actually identify and to veer the missile away from the aircraft.
The whole process is automated and lasts no more than a few seconds. The passengers and the pilot won't even know that they had just skirted disaster. Elope teams have been working on this technology for several years. 13 years ago, a man-pad missile was launched on an Israeli airliner flying from Kenya to Israel. The tragedy was avoided, but the incident emphasized the importance of Elope's project. The Sky Shield system was eventually approved by the Israeli Ministry of Defense last month.
We had a recent test, which is kind of the finale of all of the testing we've done over the past few years, which was 100% successful.
It's a reliability deemed to be flawless that should reassure airlines and, above all, passengers.
Now I'm going to play some football. And right now I'm joined by Yoav Borovich, our football analyst. Good evening.
Good evening, Lucy.
So we will start with the Spanish League.
Yes.
I didn't really mean it that I'm going to play some football. I don't know how to play football.
Talking is like playing.
Yes, definitely.
We play in our minds.
Yes, definitely.
In our
I'm
hearts.
really good in my mind.
For sure.
So let's talk about Real Madrid.
Yeah, Real Madrid, we talked about this team a few days ago, the huge Clásico, losing at home to Barcelona 4-3. Then yet last night going to Sevilla. You know, Sevilla is a good team, but not a great team. and Real had to win to recapture the first place. You know, the whole world is looking at them now, maybe losing the championship that they were favorites to win. But they go into Sevilla with all their stars and they lose 2-1. And that's a shocker, because what happened in the same time that they lost is that Atletico Madrid and especially Barcelona won their games. So now Real is not in the first place, it's in the third place, and it's going to be very, very tough competition for them.
So let's move now to Barcelona. That if we're saying that Real Madrid, of course, lost, but Barcelona is a totally other story.
Yeah, Barcelona is in control, and they played Celta Vigo last night. They won easily 3-0, but this is not the story, Lucy. The story is that their legendary goalkeeper, Victor Valdés, their goalie for the last 12 years, got injured severely. He tore his ACL in the knee, and he's not going to play until the end of the season. Wow. Now, this is just a huge story. Now Barcelona is going to play with their backup Pinto, 38-year-old goalie, far behind Victor Valdés, and it's going to be just very tough for them because they have the best team. You know, they're better now. They're better than Atletico Madrid, maybe even better than Real, leading Real by 2 points, but not having their number one goalkeeper is really going to hurt them, not only in the league but also in the Champions League.
This is not good news, I have to say.
It's not a good news. It's a tragedy for the team, but moreover for the player, because the player is finishing his contract. He doesn't know where he's going to play next year. The rumors were that he's going to leave Barcelona, maybe look for big money elsewhere. Now he tore his ACL. Who knows how he will come back, when he will come back. Just, you know, you see, and he was crying. He was like putting his gloves over his face.
Not nice.
Not a nice story, but you know, it's also part of the sports and why it's so moving and so beautiful sometimes, because you know, you come from the top to the bottom
definitely.
in a split second.
And you have, just before we're finishing, you have 30 seconds about the college. Yes.
Yeah, the Sweet 16, you know, the big dance. Only in America, you know, you have college basketball. The whole country is watching, you know, looking at kids, 19-year-olds, 20-year-olds, you know, they don't make any money, but the sport is making billions of dollars, has great ratings, and it's just going to be fascinating to see who's going to win the big trophy there.
We will see. We don't have any college basketball, football, or whatever here in Israel.
We don't have a lot of things here in Israel.
Yeah, a lot of things.
And we have other things.
You want to start, really. Bovic, thank you very much for this. We're going out for a small break, 2 minutes break, 4 minutes break, and then we will be back for the Daily Debate.